community. I thank you for coming here and affirming that our girls are sacred and loved. And thank you for participating in what is a historic visit by the Congressional Black Caucus, because we have never had a member of the Congressional Black Caucus to represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on the House side. Now, the Congressional Black Caucus, we're doing these CBC fly-ins throughout the country so that we can update you on the work that we're doing, but most importantly, so that we can listen to you and so that we can learn from you and lead accordingly. We find ourselves in unprecedented times. Black people are disproportionately paid less and arrested more. Yeah. And so for these reasons, activism is no longer an option. It is a mandate. It is the expectation of this electorate. And it is exactly how the Congressional Black Caucus leads every single day as activist lawmakers. Together under the leadership of our fearless chairwoman, Karen Bass, representing the 37th Congressional District of California, the CBC is ushering in a new movement, a movement that reimagines equity and justice, a movement that centers the dignity and humanity of Black Americans. I am so very honored to be serving in Congress alongside these iconic table shakers and justice seekers who have dedicated their lives to doing the work, as my mother liked to say, may she rest in power, with a capital W. So I want to thank my sisters in service on this stage, as well as my partner in thought leadership, who was just nominated for an NAACP Image Award for the Pushout documentary, Dr. Monique Morris. I want to thank, now listen, we're in Boston, we're in Roxbury, but this is the Massachusetts 7th. 70% of the city of Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Randolph, Everett, Chelsea, and Milton, and we have elected representation here today from Randolph and Councilor Katrina Huff-Lamont. A history maker, our first Afro-Latina on the Boston City Council. And State Representative Liz Miranda. So today we are here to discuss an issue that is very personal to me. You all know that I served on the City Council for 8 years. I created the first standing policy committee to specifically address those issues that adversely and disproportionately impact women and girls. And so now to be in Congress, to have the opportunity to address these issues on the federal level at scale has been the greatest honor of my life. This issue is personal to all of you as well. The discrimination, the criminalization, the policing of our Black and brown girls. So often we are told that our hair is distracting, that our bodies are inappropriate, or that we have bad attitudes. We are adultified and seen as women beginning as early as preschool. In fact, across the country, we are most likely to be criminalized at literally every stage of life. In November, in partnership with Representative Omar and Representative Watson Coleman, I introduced the Ending Punitive Unfair School-Based Harm That Is Overt and Unresponsive to Trauma Act, also known as the Ending Pushout Act. It is our responsibility as lawmakers to develop policies that intentionally work to make people whole. And that's exactly what the Ending Pushout Act does. We are collectively standing up and defending our girls' childhood, their dignity, and their humanity. Again, I thank you all for joining us for this historic convening, for making the time. And now we'll pass the mic back to our dynamic young woman. And I do want to say that one of the first advisory councils that we established in our office is a youth advisory council, so that we would have the wisdom of our young people across every policy issue. Vickiana serves on my Youth Advisory Council. She's also a leader in the March for Our Lives movement, and she will be serving as our moderator today. So Vickiana Petit Home.
Boston, majoring in political science. Academy back in 2019 last year. So is anyone here from Boston Line Academy? Awesome. So as the representative said, we are here to have some really meaningful discussions today about something that I think all of us can relate to on a particular level, whether it's because someone made that comment about your hair that one time, that one person tried to touch your hair, or that teacher told you you kept dressing too young when all you had was curves. These are all happening to us, and it's not fair. And these schools and these education, they're supposed to set us up for success, set us up not only to survive, but to strive. Instead, for a lot of Black and brown young girls, it's setting us up for failure. And I'm so glad to have a representative like Ayanna Pressley and so many others who are willing to do the work that it takes to take action on this issue and to do what needs to be done for our communities by introducing such a bold piece of legislation like the Ending Pushout Act. So please give a round of applause for that. When I started my activism, I would say I was about sophomore in high school. I joined the Mayor's Youth Council. And through that, I got to talk to a lot of young people across the city. And one of the first things that they would always talk about was schools, how they were never listened to, and how they didn't feel like they had a voice. It's the one issue that we all know about because we're in there day in and day out, 5 days out of 7 days a week. We know what needs to be done, and we're talking. We're here. We're at events like this, asking questions and speaking our mind and demanding change. And while some people have stepped up to that challenge and are enacting those change. So thank you so much, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with all of you, and I think we'll get a lot out of it. Thank you. I do know that a few of our representatives have to leave early, so I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to hear from y'all, especially Representative Bass, the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus. So the first question's to you, and if anyone else has anything to add, feel free. The first question is, you've been a longtime leader on criminal justice issues and pushing for criminal justice reform. How is our mass incarceration crisis being fueled by the criminalization of many of our Black and brown girls earlier and earlier in their lives?
Hello? Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and I am so sorry that I do have to leave to catch a flight to go back to Los Angeles, but it's really an honor to be here in front of you. As was mentioned, I have been concerned about the criminal justice system for a very long time. Some of us knew that mass incarceration was coming because we were watching all of the laws change, especially in the 80s and 90s with the war on drugs. And I think one of the stories that is often not told is the story that focuses on gender. So right now we're at a moment in our country where it took us a very long time, where we're realizing that this was crazy the way our system has been designed to incarcerate folks. And now it's even a profit-making industry. You can buy stock in the prison industry, and that's fundamentally unjust and racist. And so while our country is beginning to be open to the issue of criminal justice reform, in all of the efforts, I have to tell you that the silent voice is the voice of women, the voice of girls. And so I know I am focusing, and a number of us here are focusing on the criminalization of girls and women, and we know that it starts differently with women. It starts differently because it starts on the level of girls, it's because of trauma, it's because of abuse, it's because of what girls go through when they are girls, how the suspension, The expulsion rate of our girls, especially of black girls and women, is higher. And so we have to look at that and look at the root causes. I do have to tell you about one thing. When they launched the war on drugs the last time, they applied laws specifically to women with the idea in mind that we wanted to get your boyfriend or your husband. And so I'm going to arrest you because that way it's going to help me get to the man in your life. And then when it came to the man in their life, then he looks around and says, what was your name? And so women wound up serving oftentimes more time than the guy when the guys would actually get off. And so looking at those laws, looking at the conspiracy laws need to change. The fact that when you incarcerate females, you incarcerate the entire family. What happens to the children? The children wind up in foster care. It is an entirely different thing when females are incarcerated. The other thing that happens is that we don't have the facilities for women. They're housed very far away. Women visit men in prison. Men don't visit women. And so we have to look at the system. And while we're embarking on criminal justice reform, we have to recognize that there needs to be gender-specific reform. Thank you. Ilhan, Roma would like to add.
It's fine. The next question is to all of you. You've all been working on this issue for a really long time, since before you all were elected to Congress even. So what made you get interested in this issue? What about this issue really speaks to you? And how did you carry that into your roles as members of Congress?
I'll start. Well, this issue is issue that is concerning to me, and I'm sure my colleagues on this stage would agree, because we are Black women who started out as Black girls who remember the experiences that we've had. And I think for me, having daughters in our school system has made me realize the urgency in which we need to address this issue. When you yourself are going through an injustice, oftentimes it takes you some time to realize that you are experiencing injustice. And I remember as a young girl in the schools, I felt overly disciplined. I was often suspended, sent for detention. Sometimes my fault. But I'm sure there might have been other girls who deserved, but they didn't have my skin color and were not subjected to some of the stuff that I was subjected to. And as I grew older and had children and spent a lot of time looking at the system from a parent's perspective, I realized that oftentimes there is particular trauma, as Ayanna says, that we carry in our backpacks.
Absolutely.
That is not recognized by others because our humanity isn't fully recognized by some of the people that work in these institutions. And as I got involved in the juvenile justice system and worked on restorative practices that we can implement in our schools and how we need to expand our criteria for who qualifies for diversion once our kids are being pushed into the school to prison pipeline, I recognized that there was a big problem in my city where there is an over investment in having what they call resource officers, which I don't know what resource they provide. These are police officers, often with weapons, in elementary schools, in middle schools, in high schools, who are interacting with our young kids without really paying attention to the kind of traumas that they might have in their backpacks as they show up in that school. And one of the officers, before I decided to oppose their presence in our schools, one of the officers I had a conversation with had interaction with a young woman. And in the interaction, this young woman had experiences prior to showing up into school that morning. And the experiences she had impacted the way in which she showed up in that school and the way in which she chose to respond to whatever command he had for her. And you would expect, as the adult, as the person who is trained to deal in this particular situation with this child, that they would have an understanding to de-escalate the situation instead of escalating it. And so for me, it became important that we start to advocate for more resources, for actual resources, to go into having school counselors, to having mental health professionals, to having more nurses, to having people who have the actual tools to provide resources to these young kids who are coming to school with experiences that would prohibit them from accessing the education that everyone else around them was accessing that day. And so this issue is one that is critically important for me in addressing. One, as a mother of two beautiful young daughters and a son, we can't even begin to talk about what it means for Black boys to grow up in the United States of America. That's another category, that's another conversation. But this isn't really just the work of parents or legislators. This is the work of the whole community in understanding when we talk about the education gap, we must address the issues that lead to that education gap. Our kids are not less smart. Our kids are not being given the proper tools to be able to access the education they are owed.
All right, so I just want to it's rare that you're in a moment and you realize that it's history in the making. This is a historic moment. Every Black woman on this stage is a historical first in their district and state. Now, but why does that matter? We don't hand clap an increase in leadership parity and representation because of celebratory headlines. It's a hand clap because we want to make meaningful headway. And so the reason why representation matters is because of leadership of that of Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman to co-found a caucus on Black women and girls. The fact that within the Congressional Black Caucus that we have founded a caucus just to focus, also under Representative Watson Cohen's leadership, on Black youth mental health and the growing crisis of the increase in Black youth suicide. Because of the leadership of the CBC, we have a caucus dedicated to address the Black maternal health crisis, Black maternal mortality crisis. When I ran for the Boston City Council in 2009, I said that I was running to save girls. Girls didn't even know they needed saving.
Come on now.
And people told me to go found a nonprofit. But I believed that the safety, development, and health and wellness of women and girls needed to be the work of government because we needed gender-specific and responsive programming and protocols. So the power of representation is the power of legislation. I don't want us to get it twisted. The civil rights movement, which we're still in, was about organizing, was about mobilizing, and was about legislating. And so that is the true power of the Congressional Black Caucus. I want somebody to see me and name my pain. Because if they can't see me and name and diagnose why I'm so sick, then how can they do the work of seeking a prescription to fix it? So with that, I want to introduce my official big sister, under the leadership of our chairwoman, Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, for this 116th Congress within the CBC, she decided to assign each of the freshman members a big sister. So BWC, as she's affectionately referred to in New Jersey as Miss Bonnie, is my big sister. And also an original co-sponsor of the End Pushout Act. And as I turn the mic to her, I want to acknowledge the bravery of leaders like Jessica Tang, who is the president of the Boston Teachers Union, who endorsed this legislation. Jessica, thank you for being here, for what you do every day. All right, now, Ms. Bonnie.
Wow. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. First of all, let me just tell you that there's some beautiful Black girls in this. Incredible value that you don't even know about. I also know that you have beauty that you won't even recognize because you're allowing other people to set the standards. But take it from me, from my vantage point, you are beautiful.
That's right.
The Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls was created because of the unique intersection of both our race and our sex, and the fact that public policy, legislation, and conversations were not taking place about how those things are impacting us or leaving us out. And so we've looked at the issue of missing girls. We've looked at the issue of trafficking girls. We've looked at the issue of the over-disciplining of girls in school, the adultification of girls in school. We have looked at those issues that we think that we need to get at quickly and substantively, because we have to help save you, because you're going to be our leaders one day.
Amen.
So, before coming to Congress, I worked in a state legislature, and I looked at issues of the over-criminalization in the African American community. We did hearings all around the state. We talked to ex-offenders, we talked to their parents, we talked to researchers, we talked to service providers. We tried to get a handle on what it is that we needed to do to create a greater and more equal society and how we could have an avoidance to so much incarceration. But we were focusing mostly on men. But when we came to Congress and the data started coming up on what was happening to our girls, and no one was speaking up on their behalf, that motivated us up here to say, oh no, we have to stand in that space. And so the legislation that your amazing representative introduced and allowed Representative Omar and me to become original co-sponsors of speaks to our willingness to stand up and to create opportunities to fix it. And fix it by ensuring that we're sending resources to places that are willing to do something about it. And in order to do something, to be willing to do something about it, you got to recognize that you got a problem. And that you haven't been doing anything about it. That you don't understand that our girls sometimes come to class coming from a sad situation at home, a dangerous situation in the community, just walking to school. Didn't necessarily have breakfast, may not have had dinner. Not quite sure that everybody even has a place to lay their head down. You came to school sometimes scared to death, hungry, hurt, and not having anyone look at you in need, but looking at you as a disruptor. Yes. And so we saw resource officers slamming black girls on their school classroom floor. We saw black girls being vilified for just being the black, beautiful girls that they were. And we saw administrations in school districts not capable of responding appropriately, sometimes out of a willingness not to, but mostly out of not understanding. Mostly out of just being ignorant to the fact that our experiences are different. Yes. We come to school different. Yes. We come to work different. Every day we're experiencing what this society does so effectively, and that has exposed us to racism that's determined to undermine our sense of worth. So there are 54 members of the Congressional Black Caucus. There are 20-some of those members are women. So we're looking out for the issues that affect women and girls unlike ever before. You've got an advocate down there, and so we want to hear from you. Tell us what we need to be looking at. Tell us how you need us to intervene. Tell us what's your worst experience that we should know about. Because at the end of the day, our purpose, and we're not there for anything other than purpose, our purpose is to ensure that you have the future that you're entitled to. And you're entitled to become the first lady or the first president of the United States of America. And willing to work for. So I just want you to know that you all have advocates in the House of Representatives, and you have at least one in the U.S. Senate. And we stand for you because we recognize we were you one day, and you hopefully will get to be us, and even more one day.
Unfortunately, we do have to say goodbye to Representative Bass and Representative Omar. They have to head back to their constituencies. Unfortunately, we can't keep them forever. Representative Moore, the same question, would you like me to repeat it?
I just want to answer the first part of it. I was expelled from the public school system in kindergarten. Not suspended, expelled. Wow. And I got a witness, at least one in the room, that happened. And it was because as a 5-year-old, I couldn't read. I mean, I could really read. I could read. And I was in an all-white school, the only black child in my class, and that created a problem. I was expelled, but I was re-enrolled once my mother agreed to transfer me to an all-black school. So I experienced racism immediately. And of course, education that was less comprehensive as a result as well. I think I was a member of the state legislature, first elected in 1988. And one of my very first experiences with the incarceration of women and girls and the way that they're treated was when a young woman died on the floor of the prison from an asthma attack, and they were ignoring her health needs and didn't have health records. And my colleagues, including the Democrats, were saying, well, she was in prison, in jail. I said, you know what? She wasn't sentenced to die like a dog on the jailhouse floor. And so demanded that they establish jail records. I just want to say that I want to agree with everyone who has spoken to talk about some of the systemic causes, the trauma that we experience as girls, but also to the extent that women have sort of taken the sociological and socioeconomic role of men in families as we have incarcerated men. They have found themselves in the crosshairs of incarceration. And this is very disturbing. People talk all the time about the opioid epidemic, but the epidemic in incarceration of women is something that I am so happy that your Congresswoman has leaned into. I was here messing with my phone, excuse me for it, but I'm looking up some data. The Sentencing Project found that between 1980 and 2010, the incarceration rate for women increased by 646%.
Wow.
And to the extent that there are economic incentives, private prison initiatives, sentencing laws, there are women who are being incarcerated and sentenced wrongfully because their boyfriends perhaps are selling drugs out of their houses and that they've been deemed to be distributors of drugs because the lease was in their name. These are things that we need to fix when we do criminal justice reform. Because I can tell you, we start incarcerating women at the rate of an increase of 5% every single year. That's the end of the black family. Thank you.
So I'm going to be walking down and joining y'all, and I have some questions here that some of y'all wrote. I'll call your name. If you're comfortable speaking your question into existence, just raise your hand, and one of the staff members will get you your question and a mic. Sound good? So, first question, Jada, 14, from Dorchester.
What is the school system doing about hiring teachers that look like you?
All right, so I'm actually going to pass the mic to my sister in service. I jokingly refer to her as the other Anna, and that's Representative Johanna Hayes. Representing Connecticut, she is the first black woman to represent her state in Congress. She served on the Education Committee and also was previously National Teacher of the Year.
Because the question that you just asked is the reason I ran for Congress. Because I kept asking myself, who will speak for my kids? Okay. Who will speak for you? So to answer your question, when I was in the state of Connecticut, I was a high school history teacher for 15 years, and I started an initiative called Minority Teacher Recruitment and Retention, and started within my school district to increase the number of to diversify the education profession. About a year in, I realized that that was not enough. Teachers had to be supported, we had to infuse the pipeline, we had to make sure that we had education preparation programs that recognized the circumstances with which teachers were coming. What Congresswoman Pressley just said is that in 2016 I was named the National Teacher of the Year, but many, many years before that, I was a high school dropout. So there has to be programs that are tailored to the circumstances with which we bring. I remember sitting in my education preparation program and acronyms being dropped. I remember everyone was talking about Nickelby, and I was like, what is that? You know, because I had not been exposed to those same experiences. So now in Congress, I have a series of bills to diversify the educator profession, to increase the number of Pell Grants, to make sure that previous felons are able to access Pell Grants, to make sure that we have trauma-informed education preparation systems so that the people that we're putting in front of our children are good stewards of their community and recognize the value that our children bring. So that, you know, at my school, I had 1,600 kids, and the kids would always say, but you don't understand. I was the only teacher in that building who came from their community, who lived in their circumstances, who went to the church and the grocery store with their mother. Everybody else was being transported in. So, loan forgiveness, mortgage assistance, all of the things that remove the barriers that not only put teachers in those places, because the flip side of that is we're diversifying the profession and we're having all these people and we're sending them out into the communities, and then they're the only minority in the building and have to carry the weight of their environment. Come on. So we can't just go there and supporting them by infusing the pipeline before and after they enter the profession.
Next question. Is there a loose from Madam Pam here? Would you like to ask your question?
How do black and brown girls deal with this trauma? How do black and brown girls deal with this trauma?
How should they deal with it?
So, yeah, the question was, thank you for your question, thank both of you for your questions. The question was, how do black girls deal with their trauma? And we all affirmatively said they don't. You know, here's the thing, is that broken girls have an increased likelihood of growing up to be broken women. And when 1 in 4 women is a survivor of domestic or sexual violence, instead of us passing along generational wealth, what we are passing along is intergenerational trauma. And the cycle repeats. And so the End Pushout Act builds upon the work that I did in partnership with leaders like Jessica Tang and many others in this room to make sure that we are investing in those social emotional wellness supports within our schools, and that everyone within the learning community, not just our educators, are trauma informed. What does that mean? That means that if you are acting out or you are shutting down, that instead of someone asking you what is wrong with you, they will ask you what happened to you. So what has informed this work for me are not only my own lived experiences because of the destabilization of addiction on my household, of mass incarceration on my household, on poverty on my household, of the challenges of a single female-headed household. So many of you are nodding your head, and this is why we know that these problems are deeply systemic, because my story is your story. And that is exactly why we have to legislate, both to mitigate the hurt caused, but to chart a new path forward. And which is why instead of investing in more school resource officers, we should be investing in school nurses, in social workers, in psychotherapists, in guidance counselors. Because at the end of the day, if we ever get it right and pay our teachers what they deserve, and upgrade our facilities, and have a curriculum that prepares our children for the future, at the end of the day, if we get all of that right, if they don't have a readiness to learn, it doesn't matter. And so I ran for office because I have been volunteering for every organization committed to the safety, development, and health and wellness of women and girls. And every girl I met, I gave my cell phone number. And they would call me at all hours of the night. Miss Ayanna, my uncle's making me feel uncomfortable. I know you went through that. Can you give me some advice? Miss Ayanna, I'm being pressured to have sex. I'm not ready. Can you help me? Miss Ayanna, I think I'm pregnant. Can I come to your house? Miss Ayanna, I just came out as queer to my parents, and they kicked me out. Now, I opened my arms, my heart, and my home to these girls as often as I could. But it became clear to me that this was not a sustainable solution, and that we were failing our girls. Now, let me just say this. When I ran for office the first time, people said, why aren't you talking about our boys? They are the ones dying on our streets. Why we want to participate in the oppression Olympics, I don't know. Because our destinies and our freedoms are tied. And we are all dealing with the compounded hurt of structural racism and systemic oppression and the delegitimizing of our pain. Black boys are dying on our streets, and we need to have an equitable outrage about the black girls that are the walking dead because no one has seen or acknowledged their pain. And so that is the point of the Pushout Act and of our caucus. And so how are black girls handling their trauma? Not well. And that's why we need to make sure that in your learning communities, in your neighborhood, that you have the support that you deserve to heal and to thrive.
So, I'd like to share a little bit with you about the Emergency Task Force on Mental Health and Suicide, because Representative Pressley mentioned it really quickly. We recognize, most recently, the data is showing us that suicide attempts on behalf of African American girls and boys is outpacing that for their white cohorts. And we understand that there are things in our community that have been barriers also to our seeking the kind of help that we need. Trauma, collective trauma, trauma built upon trauma, has an impact on our mental health. But we as a black community have been reluctant to discuss the issues of mental health. We've been told we have Jesus, don't worry about it. He'll take care of it, pray on it. You know? So our girls are going through things that are not just episodes of being unhappy because something happened, but it's an accumulation of trauma upon them that has an emotional impact on them that requires attention. So one of the things that we learned in our 6 months on the Emergency Task Force is that we don't have enough resources going into researching us, providing culturally competent service providers, even helping our churches and other faith-based communities have these conversations on a regular basis, how to deal with families, helping them to have those conversations and understand, and then making it okay for you all to tell somebody, I may need some help. So, in addition to our push-out legislation, we have other legislation that is going to hopefully carve out billions of dollars to go into closing up those gaps. Incentivizing those who need to work with our community, to recognize our community, that can be credentialed and can understand our experiences because they're culturally competent to do so. And to make sure that not only do you have access to those services in school, but you have them easily accessible in our communities and even in your churches. So we recognize you're not dealing well with the trauma because you're not given the kind of assistance, understanding that you need in order to understand it, to process it, and to get beyond it. Yes. And that's what we recognize. And I think because we are women, Black women, we understand that on a different level. And we're pushing things at a different pace because of that.
I just want to say very briefly to respond to your question. I mean, yes, we need professional resources. Every single year I've been in Congress, I've introduced a bill to have social workers in schools, to have someone that you can go and talk to. But, we ought to form informal networks too. I'm 68 years old. And honestly, once I started talking, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual assault. And I thought I was all by myself, and I buried it so deeply. The healing started when I started, owning the power that it gave me to talk about it and to recognize that it was not my fault. And that's when I became a survivor. So I am saying that you gotta unbury that stuff. You gotta unload that stuff. Find yourself a network of other people. And honestly, I'm 68. I hardly know, unfortunately, a woman who has not experienced it. And you'll find the same things.
Okay, so we have time for one last question from the audience. Jay Lee, 11 years old, from Dorchester.
Just like that.
Stop.
What would you teach young Black females?
That's right. To love yourself.
That they tell you.
I think it's the same thing, that who you are is already good enough.
Absolutely.
All right, so before I answer your question, and thank you for asking it, it can be very intimidating to address a big room of people. I know many adults that can't do that. So good job. And so you're doing something that I think is very important as a Black girl, and that is what we sort of call self-agency. To own your power. We've spoken a great deal about the barriers and the challenges and the weight and all of these things, but we don't want you to forget how powerful you are. Many of you participated in our evidence-based focus groups, which informed the foundation for the Pushout legislation. That's why I stopped saying that I ran for Congress to save girls. I used to say that I was here to be a voice for the voiceless. No one is voiceless. Black girls are unheard.
Come on now.
Not voiceless.
Amen.
So my advice to you is to know your worth, is to own your power, is to see your beauty, and the most important, never, ever, ever apologize for being you.
Before we go into final remarks from the representatives, there will be a photo line after the representatives are done speaking. So I think you're going to start over there where Arena is. She's raising her hand. And
and thank you so much for inviting us. This has been an incredible day of conversation. It's been very informative, a lot of listening, a lot of talking. But I guess my final thought and my takeaway, and what I hope you all have experienced through this engagement, is that just because you haven't seen it done before, doesn't mean it's not supposed to be done. Doesn't mean it's not possible to be done. Just because it's not oblivious. You know, Congresswoman Pressley and I shared the distinction of being not only the first African American women to represent our respective states, but the only CBC members in New England. Which, just think about that. You know, in our Congress there are 232 Democrats, 54 of those are CBC members. The New England region had not been represented at all. In 230 years, just think about that. So, if we had stopped at, this can't be done because we haven't seen it done before, we wouldn't have kicked this door open for all of you young girls to walk through. I remember Congresswoman Omar at the last panel after someone said something about checking all the boxes. I reject checklists. I reject checking boxes. Just because the box has not been checked doesn't mean that that's the only pathway to success. Blaze your own trail and make your own pathway.
Well, I'm so delighted to be here with you all this evening, and it does my heart good to see so many young people here. I want to commend Ayanna Pressley because this is our third event today, and because every one of them has been packed. This is a woke district. Yes, she's amazing. I'm glad to be here and to see all of you. I'm particularly happy to see you all. I want you to remember just these few things. I want you to remember that you're fine as you are. You're already perfectly made. That you can be anything you want to be. And if there are barriers in your way, people like the people up here need to know. Because we need to eliminate those barriers, whether they're on the local level, the state level, or the federal level. But we want you to recognize that as you go into Monday, when you go to school, you walk proudly in. You go there to learn. You go there to get what they've got to give you so that you can someday take your place on the stage in life for which you are anointed. God bless you.
I am just so thrilled to be here, and you guys are so fortunate to have a fantastic role model like Ayanna Pressley. I just want you to for the entire Democratic caucus, not just for the Black Caucus. You know, there was a song way back before any of y'all's time, and it was called Beauty's Only Skin Deep. And you know, so many of us, you know, have grown up, you know, you're black, you're nappy-headed, you're big nose, you're this, that. And just let me say this. I can just reiterate what Bonnie said. You are perfectly, beautifully made. What I found to be the case is that people who say those things to you are hurting themselves. They are feeling inferior, and they really need somebody to dump on, somebody to pull down, somebody else's legs to cut off to make themselves feel better. And you have to understand, that's why I said in the previous segment, you know, don't believe the lies. Hey y'all, I'm black, I'm nappy-headed, and I'm a bad mother.
She said, Mama Jam. am I? So I just want to, I thank all of you for being here, for being in community with us. I thank the powerful, brilliant, and brave Black girls that are audacious enough to show up as your authentic self every single day. And in our current climate, that is not easy. What do you do when your very existence is the resistance? So we have to claim the victory that with intention, we decided to show up exactly as we are. And there is a victory in that. The second thing is bringing my thought leader, Dr. Monique Morris, into the room, author of the book Pushout, and the creative mind behind the documentary Pushout, again, which has been nominated for NAACP Image Award. Very proud of her and grateful for her. Vickiana asked me earlier, why do we call it the school to confinement pathway? Because what folks are used to people referring to is the school to prison pipeline. Well, Dr. Monique Morris got me to think about this differently and to reference it differently. We have more women incarcerated than ever before, more girls justice involved than ever before. And the reason why it is the school to confinement pathway is because when you say pipeline, that implies that it is a linear trajectory. It is not. It is the confluence of policies and climates. It is not any one single event. It is many disruptive and traumatic and dismissive events, right? And so I just want to end by, I won't get too wonky, but I don't want us to forget that this is about legislating to improve that reality. And so I want to make sure that you all leave here knowing, again, what push out means and what we seek to accomplish. So the bill number is HR 5325. And again, this is the Ending Push Out Act. Push Out stands for, the entire bill stands for Ending Punitive, Unfair, School-Based Harm that is overt and unresponsive to trauma. The End Push Out Act will work to disrupt the school to confinement pathway by investing in safe and nurturing school environments for all students, particularly girls of color, and encouraging schools to abandon the unfair and discriminatory discipline policies that are contributing to the school push-out crisis. And one of the tenets of this legislation prioritizes data collection and it being shared in real time. Do you know the Department of Education has 9 categories of discipline, and Black girls are the most highly represented in those 9 categories of discipline, according to the Department of Education. Now, Betsy DeVos just made a move to eliminate the collection of preschool data, right? So the In Push Out Act requires the Education Department to collect civil rights data annually to ensure all students have equal access to a high-quality education, requires additional reporting on the school push-out crisis in real time so we can spot harmful trends. And we believe by making data about push-out and other harmful disciplinary practices publicly available, we'll also be protecting student privacy. And then finally, we believe in the power of the purse in Congress. And we push for an investment in $2.5 billion to help build capacity for monitoring and enforcement of civil rights laws. So again, I don't mean to get wonky here, but because these problems, this crisis, is so systemically entrenched and embedded, The only way that we can disrupt and improve these outcomes and ensure that our learning communities support our Black girls in their healing and in their thriving is through legislation. So thank you all for being here in community, and thank you to our girls for being lawmakers too, because you helped to write this. So can we just celebrate Black scholarship, Black genius,